Fulton Sheen, God and the Intelligence. Chapter 11. Is God organic with the world? Inasmuch as the purpose of the work is to examine the conclusions reached by modern philosophers about natural theology, we omit the scholastic arguments for the existence of God. The problem is not so much does God exist, as what is his nature, and how do we know that he exists. Hence the long testament we have given to the subject of religious experience. The ridicule heaped on the proof of the existence of God has little or no logical background. It is stated merely to prepare the way negatively for the non-intellectual substitutes. But before passing on the problem of this chapter, it may be well to note the comprehension and the extent of the 5 ways of proving the existence of God as given by St. Thomas. The 5 ways are based on 5 notes of the universe: movement, dependency, contingency, composition, and ordered multiplicity. The first 3 notes are dynamic, the last 2 are static. But these 5 notes of the visible universe are the notes of the modern God. 1. He is mobile, inasmuch as he is a process from stage to stage and from perfection to perfection. 2. He is dependent, for he buds off from the divinal, imaginal, or from space-time, or from our consciousness. 3. He is contingent, for without our help he would forever remain unachieved. 4. He is imperfect and composite, being a variable quality, and as the world grows in time, deity changes with it. 5. He is ordered multiplicity, for he faces the blackness of unknown and the blind joys and confusions and cruelties of life. The modern God, like the visible universe, possesses 5 common notes, 3 of the dynamic order and 2 of the static. But if the universe, being mutable and complex, demands a cause because the mutable and complex is the undermined determined, and the undermined determined as ultimate is a contradiction, so too does the modern God demand a cause for exactly the same reason. In other words, the modern God needs a God. Thus, from mutability, we argue back to the first mover, from dependency to an efficient cause, and from contingency to a necessary being, from graded perfections to perfect being, and from ordered complexity to a supreme intelligence. Each of these conclusions corresponds to a nominal definition of God, to whom these 5 predicates belong without interesting themselves in the question how they belong to God. Hence it is that the 5 ways do not find their complete development and perfection until the following question of the Summa, where St. Thomas treats the problem of the identity of essence and the existence in God. God is first cause and necessary, being in virtue of the identity of his essence and existence. All things else in the world are composed of determined and undetermined, the conditions and the unconditioned, of act and potency of essence and existence. In virtue of this composition they change, they evolve, they die. Evolution without composition is impossible. God is pure being, pure determination, subsisting being. He neither gives existence to himself nor receives it from another. He has no being, he is. There can be no such thing in him then as deity and goodness, as Professor Alexander believes. It is his nature to be. But it may be asked, will not God demand a cause as well as the universe or the modern God? There are some modern thinkers who are inclined to think so. Professor Pringle Pattison, for example, writes, Historically, the idea of God as a purely transcendent being, a cause or author of the universe, entirely distinct from an effect which is spoken of metaphorically as the work of his hands, carries us back to a primitive stage of pictorial thought like that of Zulus, mentioned by Taylor, who traced their ancestry back to Unkulankulu, the old one, who created the world. It meets us with something of a sublime simplicity in the opening words of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Such a statement yields a temporary satisfaction to the craving for causal explanation, though it is not necessary to go beyond the child's question, who made God, to become aware of its metaphysical insufficiency. As has been not unjustly said, contentment with regress to a God creator or some similar notion is the true mark of speculative indolence. It is quite evident that there is here a confusion of two questions, one of which is legitimate and the other absurd. The two problems, why has the world a cause and why has God no cause, are distinct. The error is to roll the two problems into one and posit the pseudo-problem. Why is there being? To identify the being of God and the being common to all things is to suppose pantheism at the outset. It is absurd, Aristotle says, to ask the question, why is man a man? But it is not absurd to ask the question, why does man eat? It is also absurd to ask the question, why is being of God being, inasmuch as it is his essence to exist? But it is not illegitimate to ask why such a thing has being. In one case, the essence of a being is its existence. In the other, it is not. It is not our essence to exist. Therefore, we may validly ask the whence of our existence. In God the two are identical, hence the question cannot be asked. To demand, then, a cause for the first cause is merely to demand that which is first shall at the same time be second. It is to insist that the great cause of all shall at the same time not be the cause at all, though being an effect. This brings us more into the heart of the modern problems. It is quite clear that contemporary philosophy is inclining more and more to the notion of a God who is organic with the world. There are three reasons commonly advanced in support of this position. First, God and the universe are both in movement. Secondly, the only distinction between the two is that of consciousness, or value, or quality, but in no case is it an ontological separateness. Thirdly, creation, in the modern sense of the term, implies that God is organic with the world. Common sense philosophy, in face of the first argument, answers that every movement, even though it be the movement of a modern God, demands a mover distinct from it. What is revealed by sensible experience? It is movement, evolution, becoming change. It is certain as the sense testifies that there is movement in the world. God, too, according to modern philosophy, is in movement being, as he is, a process from stage to stage, that is, from perfection to perfection. The movement here referred to may be substantial or accidental, spiritual or physical, qualitative or local, and many with equal force be applied to a stone, a plant, an animal, a man, will, intelligence, spirit, or even the modern God of becoming. But everything which is moved by another. This principle, so clear to the intelligence and so confirmed by sense experience, has its foundation the principle that everything has its reason of being, either in itself or in another. What is movement but a passage from potency to act, or, in modern language, from the undetermined to the determined? The wood, says St. Thomas, is in potency to heat before it comes in contact with fire. The fire changes this potency into heat in act, or it changes the wood from an undetermined to a determined state. To deny that movement has need of a cause or of a mover is to say that the same thing is at once and under the same formal relation the undetermined and the determined, or mover and moved. This is impossible, as the undetermined determined is a contradiction. It is equally beside the mark to say that movement has no need of a thing which moves. The pure movement without a thing which moves is impossible, as is a thought without a thinker, or a volition without a will. There is never a landslide without land, nor a snowstorm without snow, nor a headache without a head. To say there can be movement without a thing that moves is to say that that which is in progress to a thing is the thing itself. Movement as movement can never be ultimate, either in the universe or in God. Movement implies duality, dissociation, and composition. By the very fact that a thing moves, it changes, for there is succession. What a thing is now cannot be what it was at first. If nature tends to unite, and if movement is duality, then movement can never be the end of nature. To make God this movement does not solve the difficulty, for to say that that which is determined to unity of process, is by its nature duality. Duality of movement is a contradiction. It is for this reason that St. Thomas says it is impossible that the will be the first thing willed, or that the first thing visible be the act of vision. Movement of itself can never be an end, because it is a tendency to an end. Running a race can never be identified with victory. Evolution is intelligible only in terms of being. To evolve is to be a becoming. To act is to be in existence. Since nothing can be the cause of itself, and movement has not in itself the reason of its being, it must have its cause in another. The sense, then, of the principle, everything which is moved by another, is not negative. It does not mean that nothing which is moved is ever moved by itself. We must understand it as affirming that everything which cannot move itself totally and with perfect sufficiency must be moved by another. Nor is this principle founded on a mechanical conception of the universe, as M. Bergson and Dr. Schiller and their followers believe. On the contrary, the foundation of the whole argument rests upon the vision of a dynamic universe. The more that modern philosophy insists on movement and evolution and becoming, the stronger the argument, because to insist upon movement is to emphasize insufficiency. The basis of the argument is not a spatial image, but rests on the very notion of becoming rendered intelligible in function, not of corporal being, but of being which is the object of the intelligence. There is to be added to the above principle that there is movement in the universe, and everything which is in the universe is moved by another principle, namely, infinite regress is impossible in the series of motors actually or essentially subordinated. If that which a thing is moved in its turn, and that in its turn by another, there cannot be infinite regress, because then there will never be a first mover, because secondary movers are moved by some first mover, just as the staff is not moved except by the hand. It is therefore necessary to come to some first mover, which is moved by no one, and by this every one understands God. Note that in this proof there is no question of an infinite multitude of movers in the past, for this is not at all impossible, provided that the actual presence of all these cause is not required in order that the last of them may act. An artist, for example, in the making of a work of art, may use an infinity of hammers, each one of which breaks after the other, because the preceding hammer is not necessary in order that the present one shall act. So too, men may generate men, even though the father or grandfather is no longer living, because neither of them is necessary for the present act. There is therefore no contradiction in an infinity of accidental, subordinated moves in the past. This present argument is independent of this consideration. It reposes on the fact that an existing movement cannot have its sufficient reason in a series where there are only movers which themselves are moved. The essential subordination of infinite, uncaused causes is contradictory. Multiply the number of movers as much as you will, you never get beyond the fact that all these movers are but instruments. They can always be considered as making one. There is in my series only three terms. At the summit, the source, the activity; in the middle, the intermediaries, unique or multiple; and finally the results which this activity produces. Multiply intermediary causes into infinity, and you complicate the instrument, but you do not fabricate a cause. You elongate the canal, but do not make a source. To say that the intermediary is sufficiently multiplied will serve as a cause is like saying that a brush will paint by itself if the hand is long enough. Addition of instruments does not diminish the reason of insufficiency, because the reason of insufficiency is in each of the movers. 10,000 idiots never make one intelligent man. This argument is independent of philosophical considerations of the eternity of the world. Eternity, as much as is only a chronological attribute, and can never be made equal to a reason of being. If the world is eternal, it is eternally insufficient in terms of existence. If the world has always existed, then God has always caused its existence. The argument of St. Thomas does not ask where the world came from. It asks something much more fundamental, namely, who moves it? It is worth noting, too, that in considering the impossibility of an infinite regress among the causes, either accidentally or essentially subordinated, there is no question of going back over each of the individuals in the series until you come to the first mover. The intelligence neither goes back over the whole series, nor does it consider the elements of the series from the point of view of time. It considers them rather from the point of view of dependence. The intelligence seizes the ratio of movement, and from a present movement immediately recognizes that there can be no infinite series in the cause which depend actually one on the other. The proof of the existence of God can be made from this movement. It is not necessary to know the history of the world to prove his existence. There are ultimately only three terms: It has been said, the source, the intermediaries, and the term. It is these intellect considers from the point of view of existence in nature, and not from their phenomenal order. If then everything which is moved by another, and infinite regress in the series of movers is impossible, because in such a case there would never be the present movement, it follows that there must be a first mover who is moved by no one, and this every one calls God. He must therefore be outside the series, and a mover in whom there is no shadow of change. The modern God, because it is an evolving God, demands a mover who is immobile, not immobile with the immobility of inertia, but immobile by pure supreme activity. Being the immobile mover, he is distinct from the world. There is in him no composition or diversity which belongs to the diversity of movement. We will continue this chapter next Sunday.